maybe I can start with a question, and this goes to Subrata. You were last out, so you are first out now. That's the only fair. It's not directly related to what you were talking about, but kind of, because what you're talking about there is make sure that you focus on the customer. That's really, really important. And you're in the subscription business, and the biggest part of your business is, by definition, then existing customers. So in terms of churn, I'm sure you're aware of the term. And I get this question all the time from publishers. How can I reduce the churn? How can I make sure that I keep as many customers for as long as possible? So I'm curious, and both for online and print, but I'm curious to hear if you have implemented any successful measures to reduce churn, and if you could share anything about that.
Good question. It also comes up in a lot of our discussions in the past. I would say the answer is in twofold. There is a content answer and there is a marketing answer. So the marketing answer is that we often try to put in and brief campaigns which have auto-renewal aspects of it. So what we do is, let's say you come up with a one-year subscription, and there are two packages, two offerings that we give. One-year subscription, just like that, where you manually renew, and there are one-year subscription with auto-renew. Oftentimes what we do is the auto-renewal subscription is discounted a little bit more, so to make it more appealing. But what happens in auto-renewal is your subscription would be automatically renewed till you cancel. And most of what we have seen, a lot of our customers, when they cancel their subscription, it is not because that their content is not valuable to them. It is they have this problem that I have a stack of magazines or I have this thing and I have not read. And it's like that factor contributes to people almost being a little bit embarrassed that I'm actually not reading it. There's all good stuff there and I'm not consuming it. And they will say, oh, no, you know what, I probably shouldn't renew this time. I'll do it later. So that's like the marketing answer to it. The content answer to it is that in the end, you have to make your content compelling. And once you have a compelling kind of an insight that people will want to come back to, and that is why in my earlier comment I mentioned is we try and tackle these customers at a very early age. Particularly, we have very aggressive student offers that we have. So very fact that we make them, I mean, maybe dependent is a wrong sounding word, but it's almost like a dependent. You're dependent on the economist content since you're in school. It has helped you a lot. So over and above, when you're moving up your career, you constantly depend on the economist content to take you to your next career level. So there is that aspect of it. We have a set of loyal customers that constantly kind of does that. So the answer again is you have to have a good content that appeals and then people will not want to leave you. And then the second is there would be marketing tactics that you have to do to actually make sure people don't churn. So that would be.
So the main takeaway for me is then really you need to make sure that your product is good.
Yeah, so your product is good, plus also when you're creating these marketing promotions and offers, make sure auto-renewal is part of that. So if there are ways where you can reward customers saying that if you get into an auto-renewal thing, your pricing gets lesser or something like that. Those are the things that we have tried, and we've seen that the auto-renewal things, people hardly call in to cancel. Actually, they constantly kind of thing. There is another tactic that we use is oftentimes auto-renewal doesn't work is when credit card numbers or expiry date kind of goes in there. Mm-hmm. So we're actually working with vendors to put in models where we want to get a latest kind of credit card expiry date from the card processor directly, so that we don't have to kind of bounce the car in and then send them an email, and they will think, oh my God, why am I renewing again? And then, okay, I'll do it later. So you don't want that. So you want that to be happening seamlessly there.
Thanks.
I have one for you, Kevin. We've been working with a company with a large alcohol beverage corporation, the biggest, I think, in the world. And we were talking with them yesterday. And you mentioned performance-driven content, which is super interesting. But those guys, their problem is they are 3 steps away from their customers. They can't really know anything about their customers. So they work a lot on brand. But when they try to implement performance-driven content strategy, they can't do anything because they have distributors talking to retailers, but they don't have direct access. Plus, they have very strict regulations, depending on the countries, of course. So how do you do performance-driven content when you don't have access to your customer?
I think it's so there are other business models where that's the case, and it's not always that they don't have access, but sometimes there's a middle person or whatever. You'll see it in B2B, but you also see it in the distributor model, you know, like John Deere, take that as a company, for example. That's where the distributor is really the representative of the customer, right? And getting data from them and figuring out, is this meeting the customer need? Is it meeting the distributor's need to get that product to the customer? What's not there, what's missing is a way to do that. Now, the performance-driven model is a closed-loop model. All it really is saying that you're going to measure how your content's performing against your business goals and objectives and how it's meeting the end-user needs in doing so. You can reactively put measurements in place with your business goals and objectives and then see whether or not it's meeting those. And those deltas to where it's not meeting those can help inform why, you know, the why. Keep in mind, when I talk about metrics, I always say that analytics, hard analytics, which are web metrics, for example, exits, bounce rates, all the conversions, those are all hard metrics. They tell you what's going on. The why it's actually happening takes further analysis, and oftentimes that's where you have to talk to your users. That's where you have to get your insights. But by just looking at the what, you should be able to infer, if you have good you know, folks on your team, what's happening and why it's happening. I would still say that they should definitely find mechanisms to reach what's going on at the consumer touch point, and even if that's going through the distributor and getting their feedback, perhaps they can do surveys, perhaps they can actually talk to their customers. Just one more point about what you had asked about and kind of tying the two together. I oftentimes tell my clients, don't just rely on surveys, talk to your customers. Netflix does this. They have a consumer, I think science is what they call their division or whatever, but they actually go and physically talk to people that are their customers to figure out what their needs are for future content planning.
Yeah, we do that as well. Yeah. There are focus groups, there are advice.
On the intermediaries who get between the brand and the customer, there are industries where you see that a lot structurally. So automotive purchase, it's rare that Toyota gets to directly talk to the Toyota buyer, and digital is a huge opportunity to reconnect, whether that's through financing programs or service or other ways. Then the flip of that is franchise business. Franchise business, often the brand has the tools, and they don't necessarily have the distribution, the manpower, the local knowledge to use that. So there's another kind of shifted opportunity. And then in B2B, often the brand actually isn't the company, but the salesperson. And the question is, how do you mix those two together? And in all of these cases, digital can be an accelerant. But this situation isn't an edge case in some pretty big industries. It's kind of the norm that digital is starting to change a bit.
Thank you. I'm going to jump a bit, but I have a question for you, David, because less is more, you said, and we are very much thinking so as well. I mean, we made our brand easy, which is a totally different story because it didn't translate that well in America when we're selling to enterprise, but that's, I'm digressing. You were speaking about the moron syndrome, which is very typical. Just look at how cars have evolved in the US, for example. Do you have an example of a process, method of continuously executing the less is more vision?
I can do a derivative of that, which is this featuring that happens creates universal tools. And something to always come back to is a universal tool is good to no one. So the Swiss Army knife can have 500 blades on it, but it's very hard to carry, and it's never going to be as good as a real can opener or a real scalpel or whatever's on the knife. The place where a lot of times I talk with clients about this is mobile apps, because there's a real tendency to want to put every possible interaction you could have with a brand into a mobile app. And we've seen an interesting thing over the last year, which is much less voracious downloading. It's more selective, and there still are lots of good uses for mobile apps, but they're highly frequent, they're extremely specific. Roulala, for example, has most of the commerce happen through the website, but people who are frequent buyers who go there every day because they know the sale starts at 10, they've got the app because they're a different dynamic. So, one area where I guess I see that, and we can talk more about that, is getting apps to be extremely effective at limited things rather than making a universal tool.
Well, Dave, it's also for Kevin, I guess. One of my concerns very often, like I love content strategists, I love information architecture, I love thinking before, and I'm the first to say to our customer, it's more about organization than technology, and most of the time technology will always, we will be able to do whatever you want. On the other hand, I keep seeing that the technologists are brought way too late at the table. You speak about the content team. I don't know if this includes the engineers, but we still see a huge gap between this phase where you have content strategy and you make your business plan, then your content strategy, then eventually your information architecture. And then after, someone try to buy a CMS or something else, and they fail just because actually there's a gap. So do you have any way to, or advice to bridge this that we actually could convey to our customer too? Yeah.
Recently, I've been working with a customer solution that's a piece of automation that works with the CMS. And what was obvious, and this may be generalizable, is the piece of engineering that was very necessary was the data engineering, of figuring out which fields from which adjacent systems. And it's almost like a content inventory. The content strategist goes in, they find all of the content, but you need to have an engineer who goes in and finds all of the plumbing and which APIs work with certain states or are accessible through certain protocols, so that when you're making your interactions, you're using a vocabulary of things that are actually available. Because you're right, technology can do anything, but it can't do it well. It may be extremely expensive. It may break over time if you're doing it on a customized basis. So that data architecture recently is a place where I've been seeing is important, just as measurement coming in with content at the very beginning is important.
I have another HR angle to this answer. Why don't you go first?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think there's two things. One, a multidisciplinary team on any type of content engagement is absolutely critical. So having a tech arc, having a data person, having a social person, a content strategist, being together in the strategy phase is absolutely critical. I have a lot of experience, and I'm sure that some of you also had these experiences where you mentioned it actually with the creative direction coming in first and saying, we're going to build this beautiful design and then it's just going to work, right? So I think anytime it's creative first or it's design first and it's not coming from the standpoint of what are your content requirements, what are your business goals and objectives, what are your end user needs, what technical constraints do we need to consider? But if you're not asking those questions first and you're just throwing a creative concept out there, of course you're going to have problems. But I've also seen it from the platform side, and I know your platform, and it's usually more from, no names mentioned, but let's think like large-scale CMS, page-based as opposed to content component-based solution, coming and appealing to the CMO and saying we can do everything, and having the platform drive a lot of these decisions, which then lock you in to decisions and constraints where what you really need is not going to, be possible. So I think, again, it's bringing all those players together at the beginning, forming a multidisciplinary team, and making sure you go through due diligence of gathering the right requirements, then asking what type of platform is going to support this, and how do we design that platform to meet our business needs.
So I'm going to add to that is, initially when we started this big transformation program, we were, to be honest, a little bit limping along, actually. And then we were not getting the amount of traction that we were needing in terms of kind of actionable milestones that were met. And what we ended up doing is we ended up doing a cross-functional team, not only of different people in the technology areas, but we decided to bring in the business people as well. So we decided to bring in marketing people. Decided content people. We decided finance people. All of that, and we made them sit in an area. So they actually left their own teams, and they started sitting in with this team, and their goal was transforming this area because this is the biggest ever project that Economist did, and that had really good we got to see good benefits out of it. There were workshops that we're having where business people were in the workshop. So it's not like, oh, the business will think of it this way, and let's do it this way. It's not that. The business is there right in the room. They are going to develop a better understanding of the technology challenges and vice versa. So I think the more you bring these kind of cross-functional teams together, I think over a period of time, what we've done is we've built these hierarchies in this company, in a company that we'll say, all right, this person, a manager reports to a director reports to a VP, and then to the C-suite. All these kind of traditional line management things are probably going to dissolve over a period of time, and then it is going to be what is the business outcome that we are trying to do, and based on that, there will be outcome-based teams that are there. And they could report to whoever they want to. The reporting part is not, and who does their year-end reviews is probably not going to be the most important part of it, but is that who do you take the direction, who owns the product. So really take agile and cross-functional team to a whole new level. And that is where I think we've got benefit, not only for the program perspective. What we want to do is even after it goes live, we're even thinking of actually extending it beyond it. So there's going to be marketing people, finance system, always kind of sitting together.
So if I may, I'll try to spin this around a little. The process that you just described is a good one to move forward, but you need a charter. So the charter is essentially a creative vision, but it's a creative vision that you're not going to do just in the project. So one part of the charter is we're going to delight people in a way that's consistent to the brand. The other way is we're going to make money a lot better in a way that's consistent with the brand. And the first project isn't going to be all of that wrapped up in a day. Right. But to some degree, that's what the executive layer in the organization can buy in on, is the North Star. And the intent is in 2 years, 4 years, 5 years to be there. So that creative vision is very important as long as you don't think that's the thing you're doing. The things that you're building, in fact, are the pragmatic steps along the way that pay off the vision, so you're not doing a moonshot. So there's this, you can't kick business and creative out of the room, but you can't have them define the project.
Thanks a lot. I think time is flying, David. I think we are running a little bit late. So do you guys have one or two more questions for the panel? Or?
I have one.
Good. And that will be the final one.
Yeah. So we have touched upon this. Digital transformation, call it what you want, what we've been talking about today. Do you have examples, and we could start with Kevin, do you have examples of organizations where, or who is owning that process in an organization where you have seen it successfully being executed?
No. The problem with ownership is, for a while, technology owned the budgets in most organizations when it came to these types of projects. And then it shifted over to marketing for the most part. The problem is, and I had that governance diagram where I said it's all of these cross disciplines that are working together. Their budgets are oftentimes completely siloed, and even their incentive structure of what constitutes success is siloed. And many times they're incentivized to not work together. I'll give you an example. Big telecommunications company that I worked with just a few years ago to develop a website, their web people had absolutely zero interest in generating leads to the in-store properties because their success was tracked and their conversions were tracked at how many phones they sold online. So you take something like that, and that's fairly common, by the way, in terms of just incentivized, siloed structures. Businesses really have to rethink, from this consumer-first approach, how do we create not only a seamless customer experience, but how do we create an incentive structure internally to where people are rewarded by retaining customers, by delighting customers, by winning new customers, and evolving the customer relationship. And frankly, yes, I've worked with some companies that get it right, maybe at a campaign level or at a micro level, but honestly, I think they're all challenged with how to do that more macroly and really how that is a part of the DNA of their business culture in their current environments. So to answer your question, sadly, no, I don't know of anyone that is really getting it to where they need to be. I know a lot of them that are aspiring for it, and a lot of them that are thinking about it in a forward-thinking way.
So, Subrata, because
I would say the same. Actually, the answer is no, because we're trying to overcome that with a steering committee. But so there's an editorial, there's a marketing, and there is a digital. All these three things that are on the top table, and then we have a steering committee which is driving some of the bigger decisions, bigger risks, or bigger conflicts. But it's still not solved that who's the owner. And maybe if I were to say, maybe it doesn't need to be solved. I don't know, actually. Maybe there doesn't need to be a monolithic one owner for everything. Maybe it's a combination, because maybe it will never be there that digital or any one of them have to own it. Maybe we're in it together. That's what the way real life is, right? I mean, in a family or in any small organization, anywhere there is no owner. I mean, a good kind of ecosystem is a teamwork. I think where there is a need for an owner and that discussion comes about is when there is something broken. That thing, that direction is not happening in a strategic way. So I think if there is a way, there can be three owners, as long as those three owners in that perspective know where the lines are, know where the conflicts are, how would it be resolved, in which area, who would have an absolute decision. If those things can be worked out, I think there doesn't need to be one single owner, and that might still be okay.
David, last, any good example?
Yeah, a couple. And you know how in every creative process you look in the abyss? This is the abyss I spend a lot of time looking in with people. And three owners really is optimal. Three or more owners. The couple organizations come to mind. And what happens is one digital change owner doesn't a change make. In every case where there's been real transformation, where digital has moved the business, there have been two things. The CEO has said yes. And they either said yes first and brought their management team in, or the management team said yes and they brought the CEO in. If the CEO is not in, the business isn't transforming. The board won't be there. But you can't do it even with only the CEO. You need someone who's going to lead the digital change. So typically, when this works, there's an alliance that's like the Lord of the Rings. And the lead of IT and the lead of marketing and the lead of product and someone from legal says, we're in a really screwed business. And if we don't get this right, everyone who depends on this business is going to be unemployed. And there's a gun to their heads, and they do the hard thing. So places where you can see this, ESRI, E-S-R-I, one of the biggest geographic information systems in the country. Nick Frunze led service, and Jack Dagmon, their CEO, made him the head of customer experience. So there was an anointment, and it wasn't like being a cheerleader. Everence, which is a financial services company, is one that I'm working with, and they had someone who ran special projects who the CEO anointed, but she is a very strong chief financial investment officer, which if you're in finance, that's a really important person. He's the layer between the CEO and the person who's the change agent. But she couldn't just make this happen, no matter how good a change agent she was. She needed those 2 layers above her to like put the star on her chest. And then a nonprofit, and this is still kind of going on, Chicago Council. They got a new executive director who had been running, he was our ambassador to NATO. He ran the war in Libya. And he's an MIT grad. He came in and said, the board made me a couple promises that I'm going to call in. And one is we're going to spend more than 10% of our budget on becoming a digital think tank. And you know, that's a case also where he can't do that himself, but he's got 1 or 2 people who have a lot of, you know, comparatively, a lot of budget and air cover to make the change. But it couldn't have been those people going to the CEO. It had to be the organization recognizing the need to really change people's livelihoods and work different.
Thank you.
Well, great. I think we'll close with that. We're a little bit late. There are some drinks, I think. Roderick is somewhere. There are some goodies. If you don't have your Moleskine easy, you can get it there. And thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Subrata, for coming. And thank you to the church, because it's a really nice place to be.